The PlayStation 1 has always been a big blind spot for me when it comes to my knowledge about games. It comes right before the era that introduced me to video games with the GameCube. It was never the game console I wanted really badly growing up, which was the PlayStation 2, and by the time I was online and looking at gaming stuff, I was already brainwashed into thinking the N64 was the big hotness from that era. So, when were you guys gonna tell me that Banjo-Kazooie was outsold by Croc? Even now, I can name a handful of obscure games most people have never heard of for most every console. Landstalker on Genesis, My World My Way for the DS, Steambot Chronicles for PlayStation 2, but if you ask me for a PlayStation game, I get kinda stumped. It's been a desire of mine to go back and try to find more stuff that I've never seen before, and in the PlayStation's library, I've already found loads. Diver's Dream, Soul of the Samurai, Tiny Tank, but all of these games, no matter how good they are, would always have to take a back seat to what is admittedly kind of bait for me. Like, let's say you needed to catch me under a box propped up with a stick and some string. All you would have to do is put a game under it that looked even half as cool as Rising Zan Samurai Gunman. Rising Zan, the Samurai Gunman, is a game that fell through a hole in time. The character action genre hadn't been fully developed into what we know today until Devil May Cry's release in 2002. 3 years and 11 days earlier, though, Rising Zan dropped onto the PlayStation and seemed to have the whole thing figured out already. This game feels like it draws heavy inspiration from the systems present in Devil May Cry, despite the fact that the game had pretty much nothing to draw from. So then this has to be a Capcom game, right? The team that would go on to make Devil May Cry were just tinkering around one day and popped out a Rising Zan. Well, not only is this game not a Capcom game, the team who made it never made this type of game before. Developed by UEP Systems, Rising Zan would stand out amongst their lineup of games. Try to see if you can tell why. Cool Borders, Cool Borders 2, Rising Zan the Samurai Gunman, Cool Borders Pocket, Cool Borders Code Alien. Notice anything out of place? What the hell is a Code Alien? Yeah, this wasn't just a studio that only made sports games, they only made snowboarding games. How and why a team that had so little experience outside of their very particular niche would work on a game that was so unlike the rest of their catalog is beyond me. It's not even like UEP has that much history behind them. They made Cool Borders, they made it again. Then Cool Borders stopped making money, and they died. So I thought that maybe a staff member would go on to work at Capcom and then make Devil May Cry. But looking through the individual credits, and you don't find much of note. A few of the developers who worked on this game would go on to work on stuff like Go-Go Hypergrind, but a majority of them were sent to wither away into dust in the Dance Dance Revolution mines. The only people who went to work on games of note were less gameplay people and more designers and producers, like Masaya Kobayashi, who was just an executive producer on Tekken 8. The first thing you get with this game is a real treat. A song that sets the mood for the journey ahead, Johnny No More.
Then one day Johnny met his match and turned his world around. He changed his name and learned the Shogun way, a land of the rising sun, rising day. Samurai gunman, rising day. Johnny no more.
This was the first thing I ever saw for the game, and a better first impression couldn't be made. This song is a real earworm and got stuck in my head for weeks until I eventually knuckled down and played the game. Man, I wonder what the Japanese had. Probably just a dubbed version of the same. Oh, come Come on! So, as if this game's very existence wasn't strange enough, it swaggers into the room with 2 theme songs. One of them sung by Hironobu Kageyama. Who's that, you might be asking, if you've never seen a second of Japanese animation? Well, he's the voice behind the themes to Dragon Ball Z. Really, naming any more is masturbatory, but let's do it anyway. Getter Robo, One Punch Man, and Sonic X. This isn't the only video game song he's ever done. You may know him for the theme to Goemon on N64, but the fact that he did a theme song for such an obscure game is just another mystery to add to the pile. You play as Johnny, a sheriff's deputy who sought to become the greatest hero of all time. When your town is ransacked and taken over by a maniacal shogun wannabe named Lokai, Johnny travels to Japan with his father's old friend to learn the ways of the samurai. By mixing his experience with his own expertise in gunplay, he sheds his old Johnny identity and becomes the self-proclaimed
Super ultra sexy hero, Zach. What the hell are you talking about?
Now, you might be raring to check out just how sexy we can be, but before that, you gotta get your degree in sex from the tutorial level. I'm sorry, did you expect being a samurai cowboy to be easy? Being bilingual is the bedrock skill we're building on here. As for controls, X swings your sword Demon Slayer for a 4-hit combo, and Square lets you shoot your infinite ammo revolver, the Johnny No More. Zan is hoarding cool weapon names. Dante's gonna have to name his next sword Andrew at this rate. Defensive options include a block and a sideways dash that you can use to duck out of the way of danger. If you want to avoid damage altogether, though, from an enemy projectile, that's when you're gonna want to tap into another key aspect of the game. Literally. To access Zan's special moves, you don't do a button combo, but instead double tap the D-pad in a certain direction that correlates with the move you want to use. For the game's equivalent to the Stinger, you double tap forward. For a wide sweeping circle slash, you tap left then right. And for a sword beam, double tap right. These inputs also apply to your gun and your defense, as a double tap forward with either of them will let you rapid fire your revolver or reflect projectiles. For everything but your reflect though, you're gonna have a cap put on your super ultra sexy antics by this bar, which limits how much you're gonna be able to use the special moves. The bar does refill crazy fast on its own though, so it's not a ball and chain so much as a very loose leash. The combat is, of course, not as free-flowing and smooth as even the earliest entries into the genre, like the first Devil May Cry. You can tell really early on that you're not going to be pulling off the smoking sexy combos to fit your nickname. This game may be the father of character action, but how many times have you had to program the remote for your dad? Despite that though, the game's weapons and tactics are tailor-made to its levels and style of combat. Zan's basic 4-hit combo is reliable and does good damage. The revolver serves its role of being able to pick off weaker enemies and soften up tough ones from a safe distance, and you're able to stay in the action while staying alive thanks to your dodge and block. Now, I don't block because I'm not a coward, but I got loads of usage out of the dodge and reflect for enemies like these cannon grunts that can serve as mid-bosses. The game is surrounded in a thick layer of jank, but not enough that it ruins the experience or anything, just enough to remind you that there was nothing else really like this at this point. The game not having autosave on by default and needing you to turn it on in the options is a very good example of that. Because I finished level 6, went off to go eat dinner, came back the next day, and now the game's acting like it doesn't know who I am! Some of the biggest things you can point to say how out of date this game feels are the special moves. See, Zan's 4-hit combo is very rigid and stiff. It's a single string with no branching to it, or even openings to do anything cool. That means you really can't combo into your special moves, and instead they take up a much more utility role depending on the situation. If you're surrounded by large groups of enemies, use the sweep attack to get them away. If there's a dangerous short-ranged guy barreling you down, use the sword beam to keep him at distance until you're ready to go in. And if you want to use the stinger, don't! It's really bad in this game. It covers no distance and barely does any more damage than a basic swing. Having the special moves be off on their own little island, separate from standard gameplay, is a bit of a letdown, but the role they take up instead is pretty interesting. And there aren't many action games that use them like this, instead of just as the filling in a massive combo. Really, the one I used the most was the revolver's rapid fire, since it makes quick work of stationary enemies and can make some encounters a joke. There is one special move, though, that really sets itself apart, and that's the super ultra sexy combo! Done by alternating between sword and gun for a move that deals loads of damage and can break enemy shields. It's difficult to pull off at first, since the timing is pretty tight, along with the game's nasty habit of eating inputs, which leaves you just firing the gun, but once you master it, you get a lot of control over combat. Enemy guards suddenly melt away, and you're more free to control the pace of the fight. You may have noticed this bar up here though, and with health and special move energy accounted for down here, and Zan keeping a close eye on both of them, what's left for this bar to do? Well, as you kill enemies, you'll earn hero bars. And by the point you reach 3 hero bars, you'll have it maxed out. And a tap of the triangle button lets you cash them out for hustle time. In Hustle Time, you get unlimited access to your special moves, get to run around the arena like you're hopped up on sugar, and your sword grows 3 times in size. Is that a euphemism? No, it's a sword. And Hustle Time has its very own theme song, which sounds like somebody trapped 5 radios in a washing machine. When it comes to bosses, Hustle Time can let you ignore most of their attacks, given the special move's healthy invincibility frames. In fact, a lot of the inputs in this game can be described as generous. When you double tap forward to load up a reflect, the game stores the input for a while, which means you can prepare well before the moment of impact. Obviously, it's not perfect. You move sluggishly during combos, which means that you can get locked into this very frustrating cycle of only being able to hit enemies with the beginnings or the ends of your combos if they move around too much. The game lacks a key defensive option, letting you dodge side to side, but not backwards. The lack of ability to disengage with fights you'd rather avoid is one that doesn't break the game, but you can feel how much worse off the game is for not having it. There is 0 variety in combos or branches that you can go into. You'll be doing the same 4-button combo from the start of the game all the way up until the end. Even with the noticeable and ever-present flaws in the game's controls, though, it still comes together to make something that even the game's biggest critic would have to admit is pretty impressive given all the factors working against it. This game was made by a studio who didn't make action games, by people who didn't make action games, in a time where this type of action game didn't exist. And still, it somehow comes together to make something that is, at the very least, fun. The game is split up across 9 different impacts! Give Zan 20 minutes of hustle time and you'll forget this even happened by the end of the week! The game starts out with more traditional Wild West settings in levels like 1 and 2 in the ghost town and level 5 in the mines, but by level 6 onwards, they go whole hog into the Japanese theming, with pagodas and castles making up the rest of the backgrounds. It makes for a nice gradient from one setting to the next. While fighting your way through standard grunts like these ninjas, Daruma dolls, and possessed straw dolls, you're going to find these townsfolk, who have been stripped down to their skivvies and are trapped by the enemy forces. And by saving them, you get a whole load of hero meter. For those in the know, you're also thinking right now, this is just God Hand. Right down to the absurd scenarios you find them in, and your reward being a thank you and a quick dash away. Aspects like that make me wonder if maybe this game was a cult hit with Japanese developers like Shinji Mikami, and it might have influenced their later works. God Hand especially, I wouldn't be surprised at all to find out was influenced by Rising Zan, given that game's heavy Wild West inspiration and absolutely absurd humor. Another thing this game steals from the future is completely off-the-wall comedy. The game is in no way serious. A few hints in the title might have tipped you off to that. But it isn't just a silly game, it's also a funny one. The game is loaded with all sorts of different jokes, be it slapstick or dialogue-based, and Zan insisting on everybody using his new name and self-appointed title is the best one. Zan is such a total dork that it wraps all the way back around to being his most endearing trait. He talks to himself in really dramatic dialogue, insists that he is not Johnny, despite being in the only place on Earth where people know who he is, and above all else, he dresses for the part. Cowboy hat with the jeans and the boots while wearing a mesh top and Japanese coat should look ridiculous. And it does! He looks like a kid who couldn't decide on what to go as for Halloween. But given the setting he finds himself in, he's kind of appropriately dressed. The game having casual swears thrown in is such an unexpected but funny pull because, I don't know, I just didn't expect Zan to know bad words that weren't in Japanese. If bleeped out curse words were unexpected, South Park quotes were completely left field. You seriously can't guess what this game is gonna do next. Dialogue is mostly just for bosses at the beginning and middle of stages, but the game is full of visual gags that you can even interact with. By Jove, it looks like that rapscallion is fleeing the scene! Super ultra sexy hero, away! Super ultra sexy hero, away! Hey guys, how's it going? Super duper sexy boy, away! At least I'm somewhere else. The other function you'll be seeing in every level from here on out is the all buttons action sequences. These are, simply put, mashing sequences, where you just have to hit every button as fast as you can to clear a section. Keeping each of these to only one a stage is a very wise choice, given how it will cramp your hand if you gotta do this over and over again. In return for jacking your hands up a bit, the game will treat you to some of its goofiest and most memorable moments. Zan getting a bomb dropped on his head and having to throw it back, getting into a slap fight with a giant sumo robot, using your sword to dive down through a flamethrower. This game takes advantage of the simplicity of the QuickTime events to give you some of the most absurd moments without giving you a whole lot to worry about. It's only levels 1, 3, and 6, though, where you can sum them up easily, since every other stage comes equipped with some sort of gimmick to keep them distinct. By level 2, you're chasing down a walking detonator, trying to hack it to pieces before it can make it to the clock tower in the center of town and blow it up. Because what's the point of living if you don't know when it's gonna be 6:33 again? Later levels will be set on train cars and have you struggling to beat the clock when it comes to saving hostages before the whole train car blows up, or riding in abandoned minecarts, Donkey Kong style, while shooting signs to ride down different tracks. Level 7 outright admits that it's gonna be full of gimmicks and has you running the gauntlet of carnival attractions. You play baseball, go through a shooting gallery, and kill the speed run by playing on a rigged slot machine that will have you fighting for your life over and over and over again, just like real gambling. With the game's issue regarding your lack of combo variety, it chooses to make up for that by instead making each level feel like a new experience from the last. And it's a choice I feel pays off. Everything about the game is meant to keep you guessing, from its humor to its gameplay. So having each level be structured differently works out really well. Some gimmicks can be hard to grapple with at first. Level 2 needs you to think about the game in a much different way compared to level 1 in order to succeed. Instead of hacking through waves and waves of different enemies, you have to focus on just one, one that's constantly walking away, one that will erect barriers to try to keep you from getting to it. When you do get locked in these little arenas, you have to be certain that you can get rid of the enemies as quick as possible. And with these big fat fire breather guys, that's easier said than done. But as soon as you do learn how to handle them, which is by sidestepping their fire and hacking them up, they're no big problem, and you can get right back to trying to kill the detonator. Level 5 needs you to rely way more on your gun rather than your sword, given how much you'll be using it once you get into the minecart. Remembering that you just need to tap the lock-on button once rather than hold it down is one that I needed to learn really badly. Before I found out how to properly aim, this was my least favorite level by far. Now it's just close to my least favorite. Both of the mini-bosses in the stage can only be fought with the gun, so getting good with your aim and timing your shots is imperative if you hope to survive. These shifts in gameplay aren't hard to account for, since the game will teach you to expect something strange no matter the level. The first level is meant to get you comfortable with the controls. The second level is to get you comfortable with how the game is gonna be. It also gives those levels I mentioned, 1, 3, and 6, the important role of being breaks from the insanity, and focusing more on the core gameplay rather than applying it to a new gimmick. Stages will also occasionally have a mini-boss or two to spice things up, and for the most part, they're welcome additions. Standouts include Stage 3's Ornstein and Schmo type fight, except they screwed up on the order and got 2 Schmos by accident. Fighting these guys as they constantly tag out and keep you vigilant at all times on their position is a great thrill, and dodging between them, breaking their guards, and taking them out is one of the best sections in the game. Stage 5 uses its first mini-boss as more of a puzzle, needing you to shoot a bomb to lure him out of hiding so you can hit him. Having to switch targets quickly while dodging his attacks made this fight unique among the game's other challenges, and stand out in the best way. As for the main boss fights themselves, they can vary a lot when it comes to quality, because there's every other end of stage boss, then there's 4 and 7's bosses. For a majority of them, their patterns are easy to learn, easier to exploit, and still pack enough of a punch that if you get clumsy, you get punished hard. Standouts in this regard include Level 3's Yokozuna fight, with his fire breath and palm strikes. Level 5's Shogun boss, who can plant explosives on you, which will blow up if you can't hit him back. And Level 6's Robo Geisha, with her jump rope beam. If it ever gets too close for comfort too, you can always just pop Hustle Time and mince the boss to pieces without as much sweat. 4 and 7, though, are equally horrible, because they have the same boss fight. The boss for Stage 4 starts out with this little guy in a UFO named Dr. Gizmo, and okay, I knew I recognized him from somewhere, and when I say this game has an absolutely absurd voice cast, I mean it. First off is Zan himself, who is voiced by Greg Weber, who knew that he nailed his entire career on the first roll and was never in anything ever again. Jeff Kramer, who voices Gizmo, was not only Omega in Shadow the Hedgehog and Detective Francis York in the Deadly Premonition games, he's also the goddamn Seaman! I've had conversations with this guy and I've hated all of them!
Well then, I guess you are just very comfortable with seeing your naked body in all those positions.
Stop talking about that! But then you have your master, Suzuki, who only shows up in the tutorial and to feature on your theme song. Do you recognize his voice?
Press the D-pad left to move left, and right to move right. Press the D-pad up to move forward, and down to move back.
Maybe you'll recognize him more if you hear him like this.
Hey, Stinky!
Yeah, Charles Martinet, the voice of Mario, Luigi, Wario, and Waluigi, is in this game. And this is just one of the many roles he'd have taken before locking in as Mario. Everybody knows he was Parthenax in Skyrim, but did you also know he was in Skies of Arcadia? Or Cell Damage? Or the JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 3 OVA? Anyway, I'm trying to ignore the boss because it's a real pain. It's this giant robot that Dr. Gizmo sicks on you, and it's fought in one of the worst boss arenas you'll ever see in an action game. It's the engine room of the train, so 80% of the room is taken up by a gigantic block that leaves your only areas to fight him in as these narrow cracks that the robot can completely block off with pure mass. They turned bumping shopping carts in a narrow supermarket aisle into a boss fight, and it's even worse than you'd expect. None of your defensive options work against this guy, with no room to dodge to, and his massive attacks will break your guard. You might be tempted to pop Hustle Time, but doing that too early is a death sentence. When you deal enough damage to the robot, it will flee to a different part of the engine and regain health. How much health? All of it! The thing gets a full regen as you're left to try to hack away at the plugs, juicing it up. The boss pretty much has 3 phases, but the only thing that's changing is your attitude, as you realize that you're doing the same song and dance over and over again. Once he can't regenerate his health anymore though, the boss becomes completely pathetic in Hustle Time, since every special move puts him in a stagger state that can be chained together until he dies. It's one of the game's worst bosses, and losing here only to get sent hurtling back to the start of the stage due to a lack of checkpoints feels bad. And the level 7 boss? It's the exact same fight as in level 4, except now you have to wrestle with the game's horrible camera. I've held off on it for the most part, but the game's camera is truly bad, especially the near useless lock-on. Instead of keeping your camera trained on the enemy you're locked onto, the lock-on instead just sort of reminds you that the enemy is there. It won't guide you towards them during combos, it won't move you to face them when firing the gun, it doesn't really help a lot. Lots of times during the game, enemies you lock onto will just walk away, and that's enough to break the lock-on. You know what else breaks the lock-on? Taking damage. You know what else breaks the lock-on? Blocking! 2 instances where you're really gonna want to keep your eyes on the bad guys will instead have you struggling to balance both and having to pick between knowing where the enemy is and staying alive. It's especially bad in the level 7 boss, with its constant dashes that put it behind you and you end up losing track. In a level that can last a really long time, depending on if you're able to handle its gimmicks, a boss like this is the last thing you want to see. But during the boss fight, I died, as was projected, but I didn't die. See, during the game, you can collect these Magitama, which will extend your super move meter, allowing you to do more. For some reason, and I can't explain this, and I can't find a guide that explains this, when you die, there's a chance that the game will cash out your remaining super move meter, but only the bits that have been added by the Magitamas, and you get to live again. No downsides, no debuffs, nothing. You just get to go back to swinging like nothing happened. It's not a system you can rely on. It's not a system that goes explained in the game. But because it let me beat the boss of level 7, I love it. Finishing off bosses will lead you to the final part of the level, where you mash all the buttons as fast as you can to toss a coin skyward. Then after that, you have until the coin hits the ground to deal as much damage as possible. This part lets you string your moves together and is way faster than the base game. I'm not sure how it would feel, but I would love to try this speed as the game's standard speed. It's like an even more out-of-control Hustle Time. You get points for special moves, but they taper off the more you use them. Though the super ultra sexy combo still works, and is a way to make sure you always get a high rating, as it's worth triple the points as any other special move. Once you run out of time, you get rated on a scale of how well you did, ranging from weak to bitchin'. Depending on your rating, you'll also get a different kill animation to finish the boss off with, from a simple slice in half to reducing them to confetti. Once that's all wrapped up, you'll be graded on how well you did in the stage, including your time, remaining health, how much you used your sword and gun in tandem, and finally your points in the level and in the final kill. These come together to count as your sexy points. All points are sexy! Then you get rated on a scale from chicken to ultra sexy hero. Since the game is so short and so simple, these grades are where the game gets its replayability from. When you beat a stage for the first time, you'll usually get chicken. At this point, if your hands can still move after shoving them through your monitor, you can try again, and you'll be able to do it a little quicker. Kill some enemies in more stylish ways, pull off the super ultra sexy combo, and suddenly you'll see your rank increasing, discovering that you're sexy, and even ultra sexy. It's a very arcadey system, getting its length from brutal perfectionism rather than having a bunch of levels. And it's one that suits the 8 to 10 minute levels of Rising Zan very well. Rating high enough to get Ultra Sexy Hero also gets you hero medals, and by collecting enough of them, you can unlock bonus content once you beat the game. This includes a new hard mode, followed by expert mode, and then serious mode. Each one ups the amount of damage the enemies can do to you, but serious mode takes it all the way up to 100. Every enemy, no matter the size or strength, can kill you instantly. You heard that right, this game stumbled backwards into inventing Hell or Hell mode that even Devil May Cry wouldn't attempt until DMC 4. It's not seriously worth attempting though. The game can be a serious hassle on normal difficulty. Attempting to beat the game without taking damage when this room exists is easier said than done. Completing serious mode though does give you hustle mode, which allows you to have unlimited access to hustle time for the whole game, which, after perfecting it, which is what you're gonna need to do to beat serious mode, is a worthwhile reward. You can also unlock the ability to play as Zan's ninja friend, Sapphire, and she's a bit underwhelming. First off, the game is called Samurai Gunman, and you want to give me the option to play as something that is not a Samurai Gunman! She has a quicker combo than Zan, but no gun, which means that there's no rapid fire, which means some sections are far less fun. Also, for some strange reason, she disables the tutorial, which means you can't even test her out before the game starts. Hats off to him though, you do get new dialogue specific to Sapphire that's changed for the whole game. The final secret though is for the best of the best. And what do you get? Underwear mode. That's right, we're putting the Ultra in Super Ultra Sexy Hero. Oh, I guess sexy too. Anyway, all it does is put Zan in his underwear. Why did I expect more? Most of the women are barely wearing anything already. Alright, final 2 levels time! Oh wait. I like this game. That can only mean one thing. Yep, the game just decided that all that matters is keeping you from winning, and it's gonna throw everything it can at you to keep that from happening. It all starts out in Stage 8, with a stage-long boss rush of some familiar faces, like the Schmoes Bro Comedy Hour, mixed in with some new stuff like a Robo-Goemon trapped in a golden frog, and this annoying turbine boss that sucks and blows you away while launching energy balls. These are all manageable, and even some, like Fake Zan, can be fun to fight. The Kabuki Samurai, though, brings in an extra interesting gimmick, being unkillable. See, normally during the fight, you can deal some decent damage to him, but periodically, he'll enter an enraged state, where he doesn't take any damage unless you're in hustle time. The fight is one of the only ones in the game that is noticeably boring. You have very small windows of opportunity to attack the Kabuki Samurai, and in between then, you're just kinda waiting. It's not engaging or interesting or has some sort of secondary mechanic that you use to interact with the boss, you just sit there. For a game that's as thrilling as this one, a boss like this stands out like a sore thumb. You can try the super ultra sexy combo, but you're gonna be leaving yourself open since he won't be staggered by your hits. The fight is a huge roadblock, and losing here means you have to go all the way back to the start and play through the game's longest stage. That includes all the boss fights that come before him. The boss at the end of the stage doesn't even put up as much of a fight. So really, they got these two's position all backwards. The final stage, though? Take the Kabuki boss fight and do it 4 times in a row. The fights against the final boss, Lokai, range from just about manageable to pounding headache, as you have to dodge lightning-fast projectiles, full-screen slashes, and a bird. I don't know what the bird's attacks are. I don't know if the bird has an attack. But if I leave him alive, he might have an attack. All of this while the boss suffers from a terrible case of stage fright and refuses to stay on camera. The devs also thought that for some f***ing reason, the game needed 2 final bosses, each with 2 phases, one right after the other, with only a single room between them with 2 low-level healing items. The second round is with this weird robo-demon made by the same guy who ruined levels 4 and 7, and is such a weak fight compared to Lokai, with none of the moves, presence, or even narrative reason like Lokai had. The fight was tough, sure, but at least it was the fight against the guy who took over your town, who scarred you in the first place. I want to fight that guy, and I expect him to be tough. But when he gets swatted aside and disappears, I don't know, it just doesn't feel as satisfying. The fight against the Robo-Demon compared to Lokai is really easy, but he can still scam wins off of you with his off-screen attacks. Losing here means that all your progress goes down the drain, and you have to fight the 3 boss fights before this over again. Phase 4 of this 2-phase boss fight doesn't even have a good reason for happening. You get the final all-button sequence, launch him into the fire, and he's still standing there. And then you go and fight him, with all the same moves, except now he's a hockey puck. Rising Zan keeps on predicting the future of action games by backloading all of its worst qualities and levels onto the end of the game. We managed to finish it off, and its death triggers the whole castle to explode, and it looks like Zan goes with it.
Isn't Johnny. It's the super ultra sexy hero, Zack.
Rising Zan, the Samurai Gunman, is a playable fossil. In many ways, it's as out of date as they come, filled with design decisions that baffle the mind, and difficulty that spikes so hard by the end, it gives you an impromptu skylight. On the other hand, though, it's so fascinating to watch a genre develop like this, and Rising Zan really does feel like it was ahead of its time. I don't want the negativity towards the end of the game to discourage you from experiencing what really is a rough diamond. So much of what we love in character action nowadays, an over-the-top tone, cool special moves, big set pieces, and fun combat are all found in this game, and it's done shockingly well. Rising Zan, the Samurai Gunman, feels like a playable OVA, with all the campy charm and genuine talent and effort that you would expect. It feels like a game made with a real, f*** it, whatever, attitude. Just putting stuff in because it'd be funny or stupid. It's not so much concerned with creating a cohesive experience, so much as it is making something that would get a pop out of anybody who played it. It may not be perfect, but it controls well enough and has enough enjoyable bits to it that I would say it's well worth checking out today. There's no way in hell you can miss this.